Virginia School District restores names of Confederate leaders to 2 schools. A Virginia school board voted Friday to restore the names of Confederate military leaders to a high school and an elementary school, 4 years after the names were removed amid nationwide protests calling for a reckoning over racial injustice.
As you come on to the page, kindly hit that like bell and subscribe if you haven't done so. Also put on your notification bell so you can be notified when I drop the next video. Thank you.
In a reversal experts believe was the first of its kind, Shenandoah County's school board voted 5-1 to rename Mountain View High School as Stonewall Jackson High School and Honey Run Elementary as Ashby Lee Elementary. Friday's vote reversed a decision by the school board in 2020 when school systems across Virginia and the South were removing Confederate names from schools and other public locations in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. The Southern Poverty Law Center's Intelligence Project, which maintains a database of more than 2,000 Confederate memorials nationwide, is not aware of another case of a school system restoring a Confederate name that was removed, said senior research analyst Rivka Maislish. Overall, the trend toward removal of Confederate names and memorials has continued, even if it has slowed somewhat since 2020, she said, noting that the Army renamed 9 installations named for Confederate leaders and removed a Confederate memorial from Arlington National Cemetery. In Virginia, local governments had been banned from removing Confederate memorials and statues until the law was changed in 2020, though the statute did not apply to school names. On Friday, school board members who voted to restore the Confederate names said the previous board ignored popular sentiment and due process when the names were stripped. Elections in 2023 significantly changed the school board's makeup, with one board member writing in an op-ed for the Northern Virginia Daily that the results gave Shenandoah County the first 100% conservative board since anyone can remember. That board member, Gloria Carlanillo, said during the 6-hour meeting that began Thursday night that opponents of the Confederate names should stop bringing racism and prejudice into everything because it detracts from true cases of racism. The lone board member to vote against restoring the Confederate names, Kyle Gutschall, said he respected both sides of the debate but believed a majority of residents in his district wanted to leave the Mountain View and Honey Run names in place. I don't judge anybody or look down on anybody for the decision they're making, he said. It's a complex issue. During several hours of public comment, county residents spoke up on both sides of the issue. Beth Ogle, a longtime resident with children in the school system, said restoring the Confederate names is a statement to the world that you do not value the dignity and respect of your minority students, faculty and staff. Kenny Wakeman, a lifelong county resident, said the Stonewall Jackson name stood proudly for 60 years until 2020, when he said the actions of a rogue police officer in Minneapolis, Minnesota, prompted a move to change the name, a reference to the killing of Floyd that propelled nationwide protests and debate over racial injustice. Thomas J. Stonewall Jackson was a Confederate general from Virginia who gained fame at the First Battle of Bull Run near Manassas in 1861 and died in 1863 after he was shot and had his arm amputated. Jackson's name was also removed from another high school in Virginia's Prince William County in 2020 that is now known as Unity Reed High School. Ashby Lee is named for both Gen. Robert E. Lee, a Virginia native who commanded Confederate forces, and for Turner Ashby, a Confederate cavalry officer who was killed in battle in 1862 near Harrisonburg, Virginia. A high school near Harrisonburg is also named for Ashby. The resolution approved by the school board states that private donations would be used to pay for the name changes. Shenandoah County, a largely rural jurisdiction with a population of about 45,000, roughly 100 miles west of the nation's capital, has long been politically conservative. In 2020, then-President Donald Trump won 70% of the presidential vote in Shenandoah, even as President Biden won Virginia by 10 points. In Virginia, local governments were banned from removing Confederate memorials and statues until the 2020 law lifted those restrictions. Statues of Confederate leaders, including Lee, Jackson and Confederate President Jefferson Davis were removed from Richmond's famed Monument Avenue in 2020 and 2021 following protests and vandalizing of the statues. Maislish, from the Southern Poverty Law Center, said it's unusual, though not unprecedented, that conservative jurisdictions like Shenandoah removed Confederate names in the first place. She said that while there's no evidence other jurisdictions have restored Confederate names or monuments, she is always concerned about people who work to continue to promote lost cause propaganda.
According to Wikipedia, indeed, white supremacy and the right of property in slaves were at the core of the ideology for which Confederate soldiers fought. According to History.com, The Civil War was America's bloodiest and most divisive conflict, pitting the Union Army against the Confederate States of America. The war resulted in the deaths of more than 620,000 people, with millions more injured and the South left in ruins. According to National Park Service, the Union war effort expanded to include not only reunification, but also the abolition of slavery. To achieve emancipation, the Union had to invade the South, defeat the Confederate armies, and occupy the Southern Territory. Here's a summary from HistoryNet. Confederate generals, a list of the Civil War's Southern military: Robert E. Stonewall Jackson, J.E.B. Stuart, Nathan Bedford Forrest, James Longstreet, Braxton Bragg, George Pickett, Bloody Bill Anderson, and more. According to Essential Civil War Curriculum, only a handful such as Lieutenant General Joseph Wheeler were arrested and imprisoned. Wheeler was released by the end of June 1865. Even men who had warrants out for their arrest, like famed guerrilla leader Colonel John Singleton Mosby, were forgiven and were allowed to return to civilian life. According to History Today, Confederate soldiers would be immediately paroled and allowed to return home. They would be given rations and in some cases transportation. They would not go to prison and would not be prosecuted for treason. According to Encyclopedia Virginia, after the war, Lee returned to structural engineering until 1852, when U.S. Secretary of War Jefferson Davis appointed him superintendent of West Point. According to Wikipedia, he performed exceptionally well in various campaigns over the next 2 years. On May 2, 1863, Jackson was accidentally shot by Confederate pickets. He lost his left arm to amputation. Weakened by his wounds, he died of pneumonia 8 days later. According to Wikipedia, proponents of their removal cite historical analysis that the monuments were not built as memorials, but to intimidate African Americans and reaffirm white supremacy after the Civil War, and that they memorialize an unrecognized, treasonous government, the Confederacy, whose founding principle was the perpetuation and
expansion of slavery. They also argue that the presence of these memorials more than 100 years after the defeat of the Confederacy continues to disenfranchise and alienate African Americans. Opponents view that removing the monuments is erasing history or a sign of disrespect for heritage. White nationalists and neo-Nazis in particular have mounted protests in opposition to the removals. Some southern states passed state laws restricting or prohibiting the removal or alteration of public monuments. According to the Washington Post, 5 Confederate monuments were removed after the Civil War, 8 in the 2 years after the Charleston shooting, 48 in the 3 years after the Unite the Right rally, and 110 in the 2 years after George Floyd's murder. In 2022, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said he would order the renaming of U.S. military bases named for Confederate generals, as well as other Defense Department property that honored Confederates. The campaign to remove monuments extended beyond the United States. Many statues and other public works of art related to the transatlantic slave trade and European colonialism around the world have been removed or destroyed.
It's no surprise that the Shenandoah County School Board's decision to restore those Confederate names left the community divided. But in the hours leading up to the vote, tensions ran especially high. Protesters gathered outside the Shenandoah County School Board meeting, hours before the board became the first in the nation to restore its original Confederate names.
We don't name our schools after traitors. They break their oath and fought for what we know now was slavery.
Inside the meeting hall, several attendees sported T-shirts and Letterman jackets from their own high school years, back when Mountain View High School was known as Stonewall Jackson High School. Others had shirts specially made to say Stonewall Jackson High School 2024 to commemorate, quote, reclaiming the name, like Stephen R. Heichman, who shared his stance at the meeting.
Tearing down statues and monuments and erasing history while indoctrinating children is exactly what Adolf Hitler did.
Gene Kilby, who lived through segregation, also shared his story.
When we were threatened, they shot through our house, they mutilated our livestock, and they murdered my dog. This was done by Confederate sympathizers.
And here's what another attendee had to say.
Unfortunately, those of us that wanted to keep the names the same, we have been called racist. We have been called white trash. We have been called everything in the book.
We'll continue to keep you updated as we learn more. Working hard for you, Shelby Martin, WHSV.
According to NPR, The Shenandoah County School Board in Virginia will restore the names of Confederate Generals Thomas, Stonewall, Jackson, Robert E. Lee and Turner Ashby to 2 local schools. The controversial reversal comes nearly 4 years after the names were changed.
Virginia School Board votes to restore Confederate school names. Members explain why. A county school board in Virginia decided this week to restore the original Confederate names of 2 schools previously deemed offensive. Following the death of George Floyd in 2020, the Shenandoah County School Board voted to change the names of 2 schools in their jurisdiction named after Confederate generals. On Thursday, the school board held a public hearing to consider a proposal restoring the original names of the 2 schools. Ultimately, the board voted to restore the original names derived from Confederate generals. The motion to restore the schools' original names was pushed by an organization called the Coalition for Better Schools. The group claimed in a letter to the school board that an overwhelming majority of residents wished to see the names reinstated. We understand that the decision to rename these schools was made in response to discussions surrounding Confederate symbols, the letter stated. However, we believe that revisiting this decision is essential to honor our community's heritage and respect the wishes of the majority. Residents debated the 2020 decision at the hearing, with local reports suggesting significant turnout in support of both sides. Critics of the name changes claim the 2020 school board acted without input from the community, while those in favor of keeping the non-Confederate names said the old names were offensive and unwelcoming to many students. Brandy L. Rutz, who represents District 5, told Fox News Digital that she believed the change was flawed after being decided in just 6 days without proper notice. Community participation was also limited due to the then ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. The agenda posted on a Friday afternoon at 3:30 p.m. with a holiday on Monday. The COVID emergency allowed for only business to be conducted that pertained to keeping the school operating, then taking the vote via an electronic meeting the following Thursday, violating BAFOIA open meeting laws, she told Fox News Digital. SCPS had closed in March of 2020 and didn't reopen until October of that year. Changing the name on the building was not emergency business. FOIA requests have revealed the then board was afraid of the backlash. If they would have allowed for voices to be heard, perhaps the need to revisit would not have been needed, she continued. Democracy needs to be protected for all Americans. Transparency and a representative government is essential. Gloria Marcus, who represents District 3, told Fox News Digital that she believes the name change in 2020 was a misguided move divorced from the history of the region. It is worth noting that the original change came as a response to the George Floyd riots in Minnesota and then Governor Ralph Northam's request that the names of schools with names associated with the Confederacy be changed, Marcus told Fox News Digital. She continued, "There were absolutely no instances of racism or events here locally that sparked the need for a change. Our area in the Shenandoah Valley is steeped in American history, particularly Civil War history, and race is not at all the motivation of our citizens in keeping the names. It is about their history and their heritage. My decision took into account the wishes of my constituents in Woodstock District 4. It was essential to gather extensive input from the community on a matter of this importance, as neglecting their perspectives would be a disservice to the citizens I represent," Gutschall told Fox News Digital. He continued, "The passionate discourse from both sides of this debate has been ongoing since 2020, with each providing compelling arguments. After carefully considering a multitude of factors, I believe I made the right decision and hope our school system can move forward." Shenandoah is the first county in the nation to have rolled back changes made to institutions bearing Confederate names in the wake of the death of George Floyd in 2020. Claim the Names, an organization opposed to the restoration, told Fox News Digital the vote was more about vengeance and hatred than heritage. With the world watching, the Shenandoah County School Board sent a terrible message. We deplore the board's decision to regress and honor Civil War figures that consciously betrayed the United States and were proponents of slavery and segregation. This decision seems more about vengeance, control, and hatred than heritage or due process, Sarah Kors, a parent with kids in Shenandoah County schools who also helps lead Claim the Names, told Fox News Digital. She added, "Looking ahead, the many good people of Shenandoah County will have to work even harder to ensure that our complete history, good and bad, remains available to students and the public. Our fight for what's right is not over."
Meanwhile, according to Karib Gold-Olga, the Shenandoah County students have to endure walking up to a building that embraces the Confederate generals who, by all accounts, according to history, embraced slavery and fought against Union soldiers. In that sense, they were against emancipation of slaves. As you leave the page, don't forget to hit the like bell and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so as yet. Thank you.